Spectre Vision Radio.
Hello and welcome to the Modern Fairy Sightings Podcast, where we listen to people's fairy encounters. But take heed, we're not talking about winged Tinkerbells here. These are real fairies, real encounters that took people like you and I by surprise. Stay a while and hear their stories. My name is Jo Hickey Hall, and I'm a folklore researcher. Hello everybody and welcome to the Modern Fairy Sightings Podcast. I'm Jo Hickey Hall and I'm joined this time with Jessica, and Jessica is situated in Northumberland and is going to talk to us today about quite a number of experiences actually that you've talked about to me, and we've be speaking in email about it. And I think it seems, Jessica, that you are one of those people, like myself and many others, who these encounters just happen in our lives and is kind of just a part of who we are, possibly our family too. We'll get to that. But welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be on.
Great stuff. So, yeah, I mean, there are a number of things that you wrote to me about that really leapt out to me. But as I say, it seems to have happened, encounters happened over a sort of space of time. So begin wherever you like, really. But it sounds like something kind of unfurled in your life, which has made a big difference to you.
Yeah, unfurling's a good way to describe it, actually. I was in a period in my life where I had just had my youngest son, and he was probably about 2 or 3. And outwardly, my life was quite idyllic. We lived in a lovely place in South Oxfordshire at the time, in the countryside. We were living this lovely life, but compared to how I was when I was a child, I had lost myself. I was acting a part. I was playing a role of sort of outward appearances, and I sort of didn't have a sense of who I was anymore. I was very far removed from the strange child that I had been, and I didn't have that connection to nature anymore that I had very much had as a child. And then there was an incident, and it completely led to a process of complete transformation, but in a sense, returning me to who I was supposed to be, effectively. Not that I knew that at the time.
Yeah, this sounds familiar to me.
Yeah, yeah. So it all began one summer's evening, probably in late July, when I was walking my dogs, and we were very lucky to live in the sort of south end of the Chilterns, and it must have been quite late because the sun was starting to turn more towards sunset. So it must have been late in the evening. And I was just walking up towards the woods. I was walking up an old track. I mean, we lived in very ancient woodland area. And I was walking up a track, high hedges on either side, all the cow parsley and, bobbing along. And there was all sorts of little flying animals. And, there was a sort of dark, ominous hole ahead of me when the woods began and my dogs had run off towards the hole. And I wasn't thinking anything except, how lucky I am, what a beautiful place to be, and was very much, but thinking about it now, there was something else about it. it was different. The way the light was falling, the way it was catching on things, it was sort of a bit otherworldly.
Mm.
And now going back and thinking about it and how it was, and having walked many other summer's evenings, there was something different about it. But I was just appreciating that it was particularly beautiful. And my dogs and the entrance to the wood were probably about 20 meters ahead of me. And something just caught my eye to the left of me coming out of the hedge. And initially in my peripheral vision, I thought it was a damselfly. It had two sets of long, elongated wings, like double wings, like a damselfly. And I turned to look at it. And then it stopped and looked at me. And I realized in that moment that what I was looking at was about an inch long naked person who seemed to be emanating a golden light that wasn't the sunlight.
Mm.
Um, it was sort of coming from within it rather than reflecting off it. And it had two sets of elongated sort of gossamer wings, and uh, they were sort of see-through, and sort of there was a slight rainbow shimmer to them a little bit. And we just sort of stood, and everything seemed to stop. And we just sort of stood. It stopped midair, although its wings were still going. And I stopped, and we just sort of made eye contact. And it didn't seem to have a clear sex. It was, it was quite androgynous in its look. There didn't seem to be any obvious things that would enable you to see whether it was male or female. Um, and it had sort of golden hair, and I mean it was absolutely tiny. It was about an inch long. And we just looked at each other, and there was just a moment that passed between us, and then it zipped off. And the strangest thing was that you would think under those circumstances, you would think, oh my goodness, wow, it would be like the most amazing thing that would ever happen to you. But the strangest thing was that I sort of almost matter-of-factly said to myself out loud, oh, it's a fairy. And then just carried on walking towards the woods
Mm.
like it happened every day. It was the strangest thing. And it wasn't until much later at home, lying in bed that night, I thought of when, oh my goodness, it was almost as if it didn't really hit me till much later.
Yeah, there's something about the kind of, it's almost like you're kind of enchanted in some way, or under a spell, or maybe it's kind of that you're still slightly in that realm until you maybe come to and realize what it is that you've seen. I mean, it can be such a wonder that it's actually hard to get your head around it. Although for you, it was, oh, it's a fairy. I mean, there's a recognition when we see these beings for sure,
Mm.
even if we've never been into anything to do with fairies. It's something really deep within us as humans. And so when we do see them, we know them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. It was sort of the most extraordinary thing, but also the most normal thing in the world at the same time. It's a very difficult um, feeling to describe. And it's interesting you say that sort of word, enchanted, because the woods that I was walking into, I'd walked in many times, but they did have a feeling to them
Yeah.
that I would describe as enchanted. There was a very strange, not frightening, but just a different sensation about the place. There was something about the place anyway, but I could never put my finger on it. Um, and yes, it certainly felt like that. But I had this sense of of it being the most normal thing in the world, and just went about my day. Didn't think to mention it to anybody, was completely, like you say, almost like an enchantment. And it wasn't till the day had stopped and I was laying quietly that it sort of hit me what actually had happened, and that, there was no doubt about it. It was, you know, probably 30 centimeters from me. It was clear as day. There was nothing else it could have been. As I went through it in my head, could it have been a damselfly? Could I have been mistaken? Could it have been the light? But there's no way. Um, it was too close, it was too clear. And the moment where everything sort of stood still and we just sort of looked at each other,
Mm.
I mean, it felt like a really long time, but it must have only been 1 or 2 seconds.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it could have been any time. Everything stopped. It was um, quite extraordinary.
What was, so I'm noting that you were about to enter, the sort of part of the ancient wood and the time of the day, both kind of thresholds, both physical thresholds and then sort of time thresholds too. And was there anything else that was kind of going on in your life at the time that would mark this particular time period out?
Um, no, other than that I had started to realize how superficial my life was, and that I wasn't myself, that I was almost betraying myself because I had been a very s- strange child is probably the wrong thing to say, but I had been a child who would very happily go and sit on their own on a cliff top and stare out to sea for hours on end, and just touch the grass and be really in touch with nature. And in fact, my mum reminded me of a time where I had actually um, snuck out when I was, not very old, and taken my sleeping bag. And we lived really close to a really ancient woodland, a different one where I was growing up. And I'd snuck out on my own, taken my sleeping bag, and slept in the woods on my own because I just wanted to be with the trees. I mean, when you hear it now, I've got children now, I think, my God, you'd be beside yourself, wouldn't you? But to me, it was where I needed to be. It seemed like the most normal thing in the world. And, I wasn't scared at all. I was in the middle of an ancient oak woodland on my own as, a young child. Seemed totally normal thing to do. And, obviously caused a complete kerfuffle. And no one knew where I was, didn't tell anyone. Um, and so thinking back, that was, I'd really lost my way, and had no connection to that anymore. And had become very, I was going through the motions in my life. I was driving a nice car. I was, you know, dressed like a middle class yummy mummy, you know, uh, and it wasn't me. I was playing a part, and it had started to dawn on me, but I didn't really know what to do about it because I was very busy and thought, oh, maybe I'll, you know, walk in nature a bit more, hadn't really um, understood the gravity of what needed to happen to get me back to myself, um, which ended up happening as a result of this incident. And this incident actually marks the start of a really dramatic and intense period of time for me where my normal life and my spiritual life became these sort of two parallel things that were happening that were both quite tumultuous, actually. It certainly wasn't a nice, clean, joyous process, I have to say.
Yeah.
But I'm very glad it happened. And the next time that I went to those woods, I had another encounter, but completely different. I had almost gone back there on purpose. It had piqued my interest now. I thought, okay, you
Yeah.
know, I've always felt there was something. You've shown me now, so I'm going to go back. And I was in the woods, and there was some very ancient yews in there as well, very large ancient yews. And I was just, um, I knew the folklore around that Saxons thought that, the souls of the dead resided in them and whatnot. So I was sort of plonking around, having a good look at them. And as I turned around, this young man, human size, must have been, I'd say, mid-20s. Absolutely so handsome, unbelievably handsome young man. He had a similar length hair to I have at the moment. It was very dark, and he had very dark eyes, and came striding towards me from a sideways direction as I glanced back. And he was wearing what I could only describe as Lincoln green. And I only know that from reading my children Robin Hood books. He was wearing these trousers that appeared to lace up at the front, a bit like motorbike trousers, lace up, but almost with like a leather like cord,
Mhm.
um, and like a moleskin. Everything was a natural
Mhm.
um, a material or an animal-based material. There was no, and it was this extraordinary green. And he had like a green waistcoat as well. And he was, I mean, I'm only 5 foot tall, but he was probably about 5'8" and very handsome. And he came absolutely striding towards me with real purpose. Now, again, you would think that if you were in the woods walking the dogs on your own, and a man came striding towards you, you'd be scared, wouldn't you? Especially with that sort of purpose. Um, but there wasn't. I just stared at him with sort of curiosity and sort of wonderment. It almost felt like, again, there was this feeling of it being completely normal and that I knew him. It was very strange. And he strode towards me, and he probably got within 3 meters of me, and he stood still and he looked at me and he looked quite cross, and he just said, "Traitor." And I was like, oh, even saying it now, all my hairs stand up on
Oh,
end.
God.
Um,
Yeah.
and and then he just disappeared. And I
What?
I was completely baffled. I thought, well, what does he mean? Does he mean I'm a traitor, or he's a traitor, or I don't understand? And I was really, but again, there was this feeling of normality, but there was also a feeling that he was talking to me. It
Mm.
was very clear from the way he walked towards me that he wanted me to take on board what he said, but all he said was traitor. Um, and again, I was just completely bemused. But it was almost like now I had this discourse with them in a way that they were now interacting with me. I don't know who, I had no idea who this man was. Um, but yeah, I sort of thought, well, is more interesting than my normal life. You know, let's
Mhm.
let's just go down that rabbit hole and see where it takes us. And my goodness, where it took me. Um,
Goodness me. And when
yeah,
you say he disappeared, did he kind of wander off into the undergrowth and disappear,
no,
or in which? No,
no,
he literally
no.
just.
He literally, 1 minute he was there, and I was looking at him, thinking, "What on earth do you mean?" And then he was gone. He
Um,
just
gosh, I
disappeared.
mean, yeah, that is. quite something. This is in the same woods.
Same woodland in the South Chilterns of England.
Yeah. And what kind of time of day was this that you saw him?
I think this must have been, it was probably mid-morning. I'd probably gone out fairly early in the morning.
Hmm.
So yeah, it was probably, I'd say probably about 10:30 in the morning type of thing.
And what kind of feeling did you get from him? If you think back now.
There was, well, like I say, if you're walking in the woods and you see another man walking his dog, you're wary.
Mm,
You know, I was not wary at all. There was a complete sense of non-threat, is the best way to describe it. Even though the way he was walking towards me was he was really striding.
mm,
Um, and even though he looked disgruntled, he looked quite annoyed. Um, Angry is the wrong word, but he was frowning, scowling, and marching towards me. Even then, there was no sense of threat at all. But also there was no sense of sort of wonder like there had been when I'd seen the other one. There was this sort of otherworldly feeling. There wasn't that at all. Um, it was just almost like someone just walking up and giving you a message. That sort of real passive, oh yes, it's just, no no feeling of fear at all. It was strange actually, because I almost had no response when he was walking towards me. It was almost as if my senses were dulled. I felt quite passive in that way, which
mm.
is surprising to me because it's not the reaction I would normally have
No.
under those circumstances if I saw a strange man who looked quite angry marching towards me in the woods.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the words, that's very cutting.
Yes. Oh yeah. Yeah. I felt quite stung by it, even though I didn't know what it meant. Yeah.
What,
And
what do you think it meant?
there's several things.
Mm,
And that brings me quite nicely on to the next part, actually. Several things it could have meant. And actually, it almost became something that I couldn't leave. I
mm.
needed to know what he meant.
Yeah.
Um, and, I looked into the history of the woods, was there someone buried there, because of the uterus? Was there someone buried there who was known as a traitor? Was there, was he telling me who he was? I thought, no, he's talking to me. And part of it, I think I started to consider whether what I had been considering in my mind, that I was not the person that I was born as in that sense. I had lost myself. I had lost my connection to nature. That maybe that was something to do with it.
Mhm.
Um, but actually, later on, the next thing that happened to me, um, there was a link to someone that was known as a traitor.
Mm.
Um, so what happened next was I walk a lot in woods. I have dogs. At this time in
Good.
woods, I spend a lot of time in woods. Um, I was walking in some different woods nearby that are also very ancient beech woods. And I was just walking along, completely not thinking about anything, actually, not thinking about these things, probably going through, what was going on with my children at school and this sort of thing, very caught up walking the dogs. And again, it was probably, early morning. I'd probably gone after dropping them at school or something. And this there was just this booming voice in the woods, and it said, "I am your shepherd." And I sort of stopped. and I looked around and there was nobody there. And then I realized that I was hearing the words in my head,
Mhm.
is the best way to describe it. And I said out loud, "Who is this?" And he said, "It's Gwyn."
Oh, oh
Yeah.
my goodness. Wow.
Yes. And I said, "Who are you?" And he said, "I am your shepherd." And I said, this turned into quite a long conversation. I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And then this voice explained to me that his name was Gwyn, not to say Gwyn, because he didn't like that, apparently, because that wasn't correct. So I like the way he started by telling me off, which was quite funny.
Mhm.
Um, and then proceeded to tell me that he was a guardian spirit of people who were descended from those of the Old North. Right. Now, I had no cultural reference point for this whatsoever at the time, um, at all. He proceeded to tell me that I was a descendant of Dalreiter and Outclut, right? I had no idea what this was. No idea. Never heard of it in my life. And that he was a guardian and a shepherd, and he would keep me on the right path, and he was going to help me. And I I just sort of took that with me and said, okay, I thought I'm losing my mind. And I had no point of reference for that. I went home and I Googled Dalreiter and Outclut, and it turned out they were kingdoms in the Old North, of what is now Strathclyde.
Okay. Yeah.
And I thought, well, that's got to be completely nonsense because I don't, you know, I don't have any Scottish or Welsh, or I don't have any Celtic ancestors. All the family history that we had done, we were, we were invaders, we were Normans and, some Saxon.
Mhm.
Um, we knew that, and that we had, paperwork, feats of fines, that sort of thing. That as far as we were concerned, we were a Norman family, and there was some Saxon in there from intermarried, and that was as far back as we'd got.
That's pretty
But
far.
yeah, pretty far. And but there was no modern knowledge of any Scottish or Irish, any Brythonic or Celtic ancestry at all, not at all. As far as we were concerned, we came here in the Norman Conquest. And I just thought, well, that's got to be just nonsense. I'm going mad. And anyway, I started to ask my dad, who had done all this family history, spent years and years working it all out. And I started to question him about Dalreiter and Outclut, and he was like, "No, I don't know anything about. I've never even heard of that. What's that?" And anyway, this piqued his interest, and he went off and he did loads and loads and loads of research. And he came back to me and said, "I've found an ancestor that is has got to be descended from Outclut or Dalreiter, because it was Malcolm and Margaret of Scotland, because we had a title in the family. You can then easily research back, because they would obviously document all the inheritance stuff and all the handing over of things and who got what when they got married and all this sort of thing. And many of those records are still available, although you have to go to certain places to get them, as you know, as a researcher.
Mm.
And he had found that one of our descendants was Margaret of Scotland and King Malcolm of Scotland, had married into this Norman family. And Malcolm of Scotland, there's much conjecture about where the kings of Scotland came from, but it's generally accepted that they were Outclute and Strathclyde, effectively. And so he said, I think we're onto something here. I think there's definitely a link. And I was really blown away because it was so random. And so we went, so then I was able to start to research the kings of Dalryter and Outclute and came across Aidan MacGabran, who was known as Aidan the Traitor.
Ah,
And I don't know why. I don't know. It's at the, at the time. Interestingly, at the time of the legends of King Arthur, that sort of 6th century post-Roman time. So I don't know whether he was called Aidan the Traitor because he converted to Christianity, and he had betrayed, the old religion. I don't know. I don't know. But so that was another link to this traitor, which was very interesting. And actually, that whole lineage ended up becoming really important in this relationship with this person that I now understand to be Gwyn ap Nuith, who then consistently started to come and talk to me. And he was very keen to go into a lot of detail about my family line and where I was from. And he kept saying to me, you need to understand who you are. You need to understand the mistakes they made so you don't make them as well. It was very, very interesting. And many of the names he gave me, I was able to go back and cross-reference, and they were real people. He was talking about one of Aidan MacGabran's sons called Dormangart, who interestingly married a woman called Gwenhwyfar.
ah,
Um, yes, very interesting. They're sort of around that time, and he kept telling me, "You're descended from them. You're descended from them." And I would then go and Google these people, and they existed. So I had no point of reference because I had no awareness of any sort of Celtic or Brythonic heritage. I hadn't grown up with any stories or anything. So to be able to then listen to what he said and effectively Google it and find out that it was real was quite sort of reassuring in a way that I wasn't losing my mind, which was my other option when I was thinking about these things.
yeah. That
Um,
must have been a lot to take in.
it was quite a roller coaster. But I think because he was able to give me information that I could then corroborate effectively through my own research,
Mm.
I sort of felt more inclined to trust the other things that he was saying, that he watched over people that were descended from the Old North.
Yeah.
Almost, he told me he was the Bull of Britain. I don't know if that's a
Okay.
thing.
Right.
And that he was still looking after people,
Yeah.
and the same families that he had looked after, he said, which I thought was, incredible, really, because I was able to, again, that terminology, I was able to clarify that use of terms by researching. um, that's sort of the what we have of the Old North and the legends surrounding it. And I became sort of quite fascinated by it, really. And this is how I ended up in Northumberland because um, Gwyn would sort of mention people and places to me and suggest I go there. And then when I got there, things would happen that would lead me further
Mm.
down the path. And he started to speak to me about, again, someone I had no idea who they were, someone called Urian of Raigad. And, you know, I looked up where Raigad was and it was in Cumbria. And he said, no, you need to go to Northumberland. And I was like, okay, but that's not where Raigad is. Raigad's like Penrith. Um, anyway, um, so I said, okay, we'll go on holiday to Northumberland this year. And I didn't ask him where I should go in Northumberland. And so I just was looking up self-catering places that would accommodate a family with two enormous dogs and found this place just outside Bamborough. It's got a lovely name, sounds quite Roman, called Glorirum. And I booked somewhere to stay in Glorium and just thought, oh, well, I'll just have a little wander around and things like this. Anyway, we got up there and this place, it had an atmosphere. Let's just say it had a very otherworldly feeling to it. Um, it wasn't an old building, I don't think. I think it was built to look like a converted barn, but I don't think it was. And the first night we were there, I was sitting up in bed and I could see the hallway out towards the front door, and a hare came straight through the wall and out the other side.
Whoa, yeah.
And I thought, okay, okay, this is clearly an interesting place. And we went to the beach, which was the nearest beach to Glorium. I knew nothing. I'd never been to Northumberland before in my life. And we went to the nearest beach, and it was down near Bamborough, but it was the nearest one to Glorium. And we parked the car and we scrambled down the sand dunes. And on the rocks next to us was a white stag painted. And it turns out this is called White Stag Beach. And again, there was a sort of real sense of sort of being where you're supposed to be-ness about it.
Mm.
Um, and this was where I got up in the middle of the night on this holiday, and I was actually going to the loo. And I was sitting there, and because I've got young children, I left the door open, as you do.
Yeah,
Anyone who's got very young children will know that.
never close doors.
Yeah, you give up. Um, and I could see right the way down the corridor of this self-catering cottage, and there was a wooden door in between that separated the bedrooms from the front door and the bathroom. And because the bathroom was downstairs as well, and the bedrooms were downstairs, and the sitting room was on the top floor because there was these amazing views of Bamborough Castle. So, and this door was ajar. And I was just looking straight ahead, and there was quite a bright moon that night. So I could see quite clearly because the back door and the front door were glass and they had no blind. So I could, it was illuminated effectively by moonlight. And the door moved. And I knew both the dogs were in my room. And I could see around the door fingers, quite a small hand, like maybe a sort of 8-year-old child, but very long, skinny fingers that were slightly like a tanned, weather-beaten sort of color. and it had a big rectangular pane of glass. And as I looked at it, um, I could see the top of a head, a little tiny, the best way I can describe it, and another set of fingers. So it was almost like this thing was
Mm.
sort of hiding, and it would sort of pop up, and then it would see I was looking, and it would sort of sink back down again, as if it thought I couldn't see it, but I could quite clearly see it. And the best way I could describe what it looked like was Dobby the house elf, um, in the nicest possible way. Very similar skin tone, very similar um, sort of bony salad. But again, I wasn't frightened at all. It felt very safe and very like it was supposed to be there. Um, and it was almost comical because I was sort of watching it almost laughing because it was like when a child is trying to hide and they think they're invisible. And it would, it then moved its other hand. So there was both these fingers up over the edge, and it would sort of raise its head up and go, oh, she's still there, and raise it back down. But it would leave the top of its head exposed. So you could clearly see it with these fingers. And I just sat for quite some time just watching this thing in utter hilarity because I thought it thinks I can't see it. And I've since found out that it was not the right thing to do, but I didn't know because I don't know any of these things at the time. But I said, I can see you, And then it just sort of ducked down a bit further. Um, and I can only think that it was a brownie. I couldn't see the rest of its body, so I didn't know what it was wearing or if it was hairy, but its head and its hands were not. That was just skin and quite slim and long fingers and very sort of sallow and
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
sort of quite sort of large sort of ears. I don't know if they were pointy or not. I couldn't really see. There was a lot of shadow. But yeah, it was hilarious. It thought that I couldn't see it.
Wow. And how tall would you estimate, judging by the hands and
Um,
the head?
I would say, well, it was one of those doors that was sort of a two-thirds glass, and then the lower portion was
Mm.
wood, and obviously a wood surround at the top. So I'd say it was probably about 3.5 feet tall.
So it was coming up from the wooden bit, sort of into where the glass started on the
Yes,
door.
yes. But then when it was ducking back down again, it was leaving its fingers in the top of its head in
Mm.
the glass bit, so I could just see it still.
Goodness me. Did you
Yeah.
ever get to ask the owner of the Airbnb? I mean, we don't often meet them, do we? So,
No,
no.
no, they're actually quite good there, and they do always ring to see everything's all right. But no, I didn't because at the time I was quite sort of early on in my journey, and I was still in that phase of, am I losing my mind?
Mm.
And so, no, I didn't ask them because, um, I was still really worried that they would just think that I was going mad.
Mhm.
But I did obviously do try and do some research around there about, why, if there was any sightings there or if anything had happened there, because it felt really a really magical place. And from the top floor you could see Bamborough Castle, and on the hill there was a tree that had been struck by lightning, but it looked like a stag. And again, there was this white stag on the beach, and this hare, and then this brownie. Um,
Gosh, yeah.
I since found out when researching the area as a result of seeing this that actually Urien of Raiged, of one of the kings of the Old North, was in fact murdered just down the road from there.
Goodness
Yeah,
me.
at Hawick. So literally probably a few miles away. So
Yeah.
and it linked into what Gwyn had said was you need to go to this place um because of Urien. And I was like, well, that's the wrong place, wrong side of the country, you know? And it turned out not to be at all. It turned out to be where Urien had been betrayed by an ally. Again, a traitor.
Traitor, yeah.
Yeah,
Did,
and killed on their orders.
and so
That actually led to the fall of the fall of all the allies then fell apart, and it led to the fall of the Old North effectively over time. So yeah, very lots of things going on.
very much so.
Mm.
And the era that that took place in, did you say it was around the
Yeah,
6th
sixth
century?
century. So again,
Yeah.
it's very much the time of when, you know, King Arthur, that sort of time, of uh you've got the Sax the Romans have been gone 100 or so years. Everything's in a little bit of disarray. There's lots of tribal fighting. It's broken down into principalities. You've got people, the the Dalrighans invading from Ireland. You have the Saxons beginning to invade as well. So yeah, it's a very tumultuous time in British history, which I thought actually was quite poignant because we're also in a very tumultuous time in history as well. Um, and actually, one of the things that Gwyn had said to me was, you need to understand so that you can go forward without fear. It was almost as like you need to understand what happened in the past, who you are, what happened to your family in the past, the mistakes they made, so that when we're again thrown into utter turmoil, you don't do the same things. And it was and it was one of those things where all these things seem to be happening separately and be completely random and but as obviously time goes on, because this has happened now over a period of 10 years, especially now, it all becomes very clear that I'm in a much better place to deal with the way things are in the world and to go forward. I mean, I would say now I'm awake
Mm.
for sure.
Yeah, I mean, how did you, when you were up in Northumberland, uh, in the place that you visited,
Mm.
did you find, did you, were you led to do anything then, in fact, or did you just feel that actually the act of going there?
No, so there was
Um,
yeah, there was a where this tree was that was looked like a stag. I felt a really strong draw to walk up there. It was almost like I needed to go there. I was being called to that place.
Mm.
And I walked up there one day and it was not really, there was a footpath nearby, but it was not really on a footpath. I had to do a little bit of trespassing to
Right.
get there. And but I just couldn't not. It was almost like I couldn't get it out of my mind, which was really strange. It just kept coming back to me. And so I went up there and it turned out to be on this sort of rock formation that was, I wouldn't describe it. I mean, it would have, I suppose it would have been like a natural hill fort. It wasn't built, but it was stacks of rocks and it was a natural, it was obviously at the top of a hill and there was a sort of natural gap in the rocks that was, or whether it had been taken out, quarry, I don't know, but
Mhm.
there was a gap in the rocks that was kind of I'd say 2 car widths wide. And when you got close to this rock hill, it was very much bigger than it had looked. So
Mm.
when you walked in between these rocks, you really were either side of a really quite substantial, um, probably a push to call it a cliff, but it was extremely, you were very enclosed and it was very windy and very exposed. And you walked in there and everything stopped. It was like a very silent space. And
Mm.
in the middle, there was this stone just sitting there with a flat top. And I went in there. And I don't know why. I just went in there and I just sat down next to this stone and put my hands on it. And um, I don't, again, you know, at that point, Gwyn just started talking to me again about the old North. They started telling me about other people. He was telling me about Urian of Reged, and then then he started telling me, about you know, allies and betrayers, and um, he started telling me about a stone circle that was in Reged, and that I should go there. And just it was almost like he'd got me away from the busyness of the family, and it was just a absolute silent place.
Mm.
Even though the weather was really blowy outside, it was a silent place, and it felt like, I mean, he told me that Urian was killed there at that place. But if you research it, it says no, Urian was killed, probably on the opening in near Howick, which is a couple of miles up the road, and he was like, it was here
Mm.
in this place. Um, and again, he wanted me to understand their stories, and um, you know, who the honorable men were and who the betrayers were, and who was he was very keen to explain to me about who was quick to battle. Um, he talked a lot about Arthur MacAden, who is one of the people that is in contention to potentially be the real life King Arthur,
Mm.
effectively, although he was just a son of Aidan MacGabran, Aidan the traitor. And he said, that he was too quick to battle. There was a over pride, and a too quick to battle, and this was his undoing, and things like that. There was an arrogance, um,
Mm.
that you must not repeat, and things like that. And yeah, he just sat and talked to me about all these people that I didn't really know who they were, but then was able to corroborate where they were. But that we talked about their particular personality feelings, and that it was very important that I didn't repeat their mistakes and that I should know their stories. He was really keen for me to understand the story of Urian of Reged, and what a nice man he was, and an honorable man he was, which was rare for the times, he said. Um,
Mm.
and I think I've since found out, I think that it was Urien of Reged, I think that was the funder of Taliesin. Taliesin wrote his poems
Yeah.
for Urien, I believe.
Goodness
I
me.
believe. Um, and of course, this brought in, and obviously, in finding out, well, how do I find out Urian's story? Well, then it introduces you to Taliesin. And again, it's this whole bardic tradition, of which Gwyn ap Neath is is fundamentally part of. This is his time. These are his people, and although we have no sort of point of reference for who when Gwyn ap Nuith actually lived as a man, or if he ever did, although he's shown me that he did. Um, uh, this is exactly the same point in time as Gwyn ap Nuith. And the references to him as well, and those writings, in the Welsh literature that has survived. And of course, I had absolutely no point of reference for any of this. So it was just being given to me that it was really important that I understood what had happened at this time to these people and how it had happened and the mistakes that they made, and that I did not repeat them. And, it felt, I don't think I took it very seriously at first. And I think that, Gwyn would come back and really say, you've got to take this seriously. This is really important that you understand. But of course, this is way before, this is probably, I don't know, 5 years ago. So this is sort of, this is before COVID. This is before any of the crazy stuff that's happening in the world right now had happened. So, things were quite peaceful. I was like, well, why is it so important? But I think actually now looking back, he was preparing me to find my strength and my anchoring to deal with what life was going to throw at us all in the coming years. And I'm very grateful that he did, actually, because, I went from being extremely unsure of myself to being extremely grounded and protected, and have a very clear sense of self as a result of this. So, this was sort of a huge learning curve for me that I'm very grateful for.
It's really interesting to hear you say this. I don't know if you watched the interview that I did with Danu Forrest, but if not, you might be interested to watch that. But she says the same thing, is that, when she came into contact with him, with Gwyn ap Nuith, or Gwyn, as you say, you'd like to,
Gwyn, yes.
Gwyn. I
There's
wonder,
it. The GW apparently is an ooh, a goo. Gwyn.
Gwyn.
Yes,
Yeah,
he gets very cross when I'm lazy and call him Gwyn.
that's interesting because Anun, as
Not his
in
name,
Anwin.
apparently. Yeah.
Right, okay. Yeah, there's I really don't know many Welsh words, but there's Anun, which has got the oo as the W. So I hadn't thought of that before, and I wonder what Danu would make of that too, because she's written a great book on Gwen that I would highly recommend. You may have it yourself for people to get. But she said exactly the same thing, is that well, in working with him, she became sort of much more confident and stepped into her power, essentially. It's really kind of stepped into her full power of who she is and sense of identity, in a in a quite a notable way. So it does seem that he does find those that he's going to work with, and he really does aid those people. It's very interesting to hear about how this is all kind of developed. And when you talked about, the quick to fight, was that meaningful to you in terms of either what was happening in your sphere or what began to, you know, unravel on the world's stage, with the kind of different actors in the world? How did that make sense to you, or did it? Are you still making sense?
At the time, we were going through quite a tumultuous time. Well, it was just beginning with my children,
Right.
they were both neurodivergent. They school wasn't really going so well. Um, and I was finding myself in situations where I just wanted to advocate for them,
Mm.
where it was quite confrontational, not on my part, but
Yeah.
I was being dismissed and gaslit, and no one was listening, and everything was very difficult. And this is not an uncommon experience, um, to have that experience. But it was starting to really get to the point where we were probably going to end up at tribunal. So there was going to be a confrontation. And it was interesting because I avoid confrontation. I don't like confrontation. I don't like having to, or I didn't like having to advocate for myself. I was very apologetic for myself all the time. And so it's interesting that it came a time where I was going to have to battle, although I didn't know it yet. And it ended up being one hell of a battle. And I was going to have to be hugely out of my comfort zone, representing myself in court against barristers, in order to get what my children needed.
Yeah.
And, you know, I I think I did need a fire in my belly to do it. And um, I certainly gained that. But also, I think I had just wandered so far from my life path. Um, I don't know who I was living for anymore. I was just, you know, making decisions based on how I thought I should be to fit in with societal expectations. And that in itself is a battle to find yourself again.
Mm.
Um, and for the people who know you as the other person as well, to then be able to, you need some real confidence to be able to fully show who you really are. Um, and that process is still ongoing. I think there's a lot of people that won't know that whole side of my life probably until they come across this podcast, I should imagine, you know. Um, but many people do. And I think it was really, I think I watched your interview with Jessica Mitchell, where she said that Gwyn showed her the the beauty in death and decay, and the whole process that I have been through is a death
Mm.
and decay of all my, I think some people call it shadow work,
Mm.
of all the things I believed about myself that weren't true, all the things that I was pretending to be that weren't true, is a is a process of decay and an evisceration, effectively, of a bonfire of fakeness and facades. And that that is exactly what my relationship with Gwyn has enabled me to do. And actually, learning the beauty in death was actually something that um, he brought to me after I'd seen your interview with Jessica Mitchell, and I said, well, how can that be? I don't, I'm a bit squeamish. I don't, that's not beautiful. That's grim. And actually, within a few months of that happening, one of my enormous and most beloved dogs, um, interestingly, who Gwyn really approved of. He used to say to me, I like your hounds, he used to say. Because I had two enormous dogs.
Yeah.
he approved of my hounds, apparently. And one of them became very ill very suddenly.
Mm.
And there was not anything that was going to be able to be done.
Yeah.
Um, and actually, ironically, I ended up nursing her through until it was time that it was not safe to carry on any longer.
Yeah.
And I found myself sleeping downstairs with her, wandering around in the garden with her as, her mind went a bit, wandering around in the garden with her in the early hours of the morning in the countryside, just we were in the dark, in the pitch black, in the middle of the night, and she's just pottering around. And I found myself, most people would have gone, I'm sleep deprived. I'm having to stand outside in the garden in my pajamas at 2 o'clock in the morning in the pitch black in the middle of nowhere. Um, and I found myself thinking back to what Gwyn had said about that there's beauty in death. And actually, those times that I spent with her while she was dying were some of the most beautiful and profound moments of the whole time that we had spent together. Um, just being with her while, uh, surrounded by stars in the middle of the night, just me and her in the silence, making sure that she had what she needed to carry on comfortably, and just nursing a soul to the end of their life was such a profound experience that I felt that uh, Gwyn was presenting me with that lesson that there is beauty in death. In
Mm.
the process of death, there is beauty to be found, but in a way that I could stomach, because I certainly couldn't have in the way that he'd shown Jessica Mitchell, where she was shown, physical decay, the beauty in the physical decay of the body and things, after death. That's not something that I would have appreciated. And it was such a profound experience, um, being able to do that for her, that actually, it was absolutely life changing. And I think it's changed my view of how we view death
Mm.
in Western culture, and how end of life care is, can be as beautiful and as important as the most joyous times you have as well. And, and again, that's something I'm very appreciative that Gwyn introduced to my life as well.
That's absolutely beautiful. Sometimes when there are things that feel a bit too much for us, sometimes they are offered in these experiences, and it's quite amazing how the timing, how this comes about. It's happened to
Yeah.
me a couple of times in my life, and where I've kind of really come up against something that was just, oh no, that's too much, and then, well, it's presented right in your life, and you need to move through it, and yeah, you find, goodness, how wrong was I? I just
Yeah.
never knew. I really didn't know.
Mm.
And you become a different person, don't you, as a result of that?
Yeah. I mean, I think most people would see terminal illness as, you know, a reason for, absolute anguish and tragedy. But now I see it as an opportunity to actually spend some of the most important times that you can have, the most profound times that you can have with that person. You may have known them your whole life and never really known them until you go through that process with them,
Mm,
I think.
yeah, I'm so grateful for your sharing here. Um, I'm so drawn to ask you about what that kind of shedding was like. So when you're working with Gwyn and you're being asked to step through these kind of thresholds in your life and let things, fall away within yourself. And well, I want to say before I forget, brilliant, brilliant dad for aiding you and supporting you in your, research and explorations, and your husband. There you are fighting, for your kids' sake. Um, trusting your intuition and your what you're receiving from Gwyn and other kind of intuitions that are arising for you to go off to these places, with your presumably a lot of the time
Yeah, my
family
whole
in tow.
family. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think my husband, when I think about what my husband has kind of been through, this journey with me. I mean, I mean, it's amazing, really, because I think most people probably would have got divorced. I think that, he's gone from having a wife, you know, driving nice cars, wearing, you know, certain type of clothing or whatever, to having a wife who, takes all her clothes off and goes in the White Spring at Glastonbury.
Yeah.
you know and so what he's had to do, and
Mm.
it's interesting actually, because there has been obviously difficult times in the process, because there must have been times where he just turned around and thought, who are you?
Mm.
You're not the person that I married. you know um and I remember we were going through a difficult time at one point with all this, because not for any fault of his own, but because I was going through, I think probably what you call a dark night of the soul, really thinking, who the hell am I? What is going on? And Gwyn said to me, your transformation will be his transformation.
Yeah.
And actually, only a few days later, my husband was driving home down a dark lane, because we live in the middle of nowhere. And he came through the door and he said, you won't believe what I saw on the road on the way home. I saw a white stag.
Oh, wow.
And I thought, Gwyn.
Yeah.
And he said it was amazing. It was almost glowing. And I thought it probably was. And I didn't say anything to him, because
Mm.
he's on a very different place in his journey. But I knew then
Yeah.
that he was coming with me,
Coming with you.
albeit a little bit far behind.
Oh,
And I
just got shivers.
knew, yeah, and I knew that it was all going to be okay,
Mm.
you know.
Yeah.
And it has been, and we've been through absolute tumult. But again, I think again, with trusting the guidance, I think when they tell you things that you can corroborate through science and your own research, it doesn't seem quite so mad. And I think that, clearly I needed that, these points of reference to kind of reassure me, but also to prepare me, because in December 2024, I opened my curtains one morning to find about 200 jackdaws on my driveway. And I thought, that's not normal.
Mm.
And then was in half sleep that night, and met the washer at the forge in my half sleep. And of course, it was the Morrigan, who I had, again, no point of reference for. But because I'd already been through this process with Gwyn, I knew not to freak out. Although, you know, when you meet the washer at the forge, it's a bit of a scary thing. she's she's not she doesn't pretty herself for your consumption, let's say. And
Yeah.
and it was the Morrigan. And that's how I met the Morrigan. And she just simply said to me, there's going to be a war. You need to prepare. And again, I thought, I'm going crackers. And she said, prepare as you would for any major, problem. So now, bearing in mind this was December 2024, very early December, probably end of November 2024. So I thought, okay, this could be insane, but I'm going to do what I'm told, because I've done what I've told before and it's worked out all right.
Yeah.
And I bought loads of toilet rolls and I filled my house up with tinned food, and I filled my freezer up. And of course, in January 2020, 20 in January, this is sorry, December 2019. So of course,
Okay.
sorry, this was just before the pandemic. Sorry, this was
Right.
sorry, I'm thinking of last year. That's not last year. It was 2019, early December 2019.
Yeah.
So of course, 8 weeks
Mm,
later, I needed all those things.
mm,
So I had learned, Gwyn had taught me to listen, to not freak out, don't be scared of things that appear scary,
yeah.
because Gwyn can sometimes appear in a way that gives you a bit of a jolt. And although he's only done that to me once, um, and he appeared as the blackest black, like dark, like a void man with antler shapes and with eyes like burning coals.
In,
But
in
he
what
was
in what situation would
um,
be like that?
again in half sleep. I was dropping off to sleep, and he just appeared like behind my shut eyes,
Mm,
and I can't even. It's the blackest black. It's not even a color. It's like a void. Is the only way. And it was man. He was man shaped with his antlers on
mm,
his head. Um, and the only thing that was you could see were his eyes, which were just flames. And yeah, I told him he could pack that in. Because
yeah.
I so
Yeah.
went, and because I went and got a jolt of adrenaline, it went. So he didn't get to speak to me anyway because I'd had a panic because I just had no idea what that was. So then when he came to me previously, after that, sorry, he came to me um very much like the man in the woods, as a man with the dark hair. And actually, it turns out that the man in Lincoln Green was Gwyn. So he comes to me with his dark hair and with his dark eyes, and very handsome. It's quite distracting, but
Amazing.
but he will but him coming to me with the darkness and the burning eyes one time had taught me that actually things that sometimes appear scary are not scary, and they appear like that for a reason.
Mm,
And actually the reason was because when I met the Morrigan, she won't make herself palatable for you. She
mm,
appears how she needs to appear. And when she appears as the washer in the Ford, which is, oncoming the incoming death, she has a bloodied mouth and she looks at you like prey. When you make eye contact, it goes through you like, you don't know, whether she's safe or not.
mm,
And however, she had a message for me that there was going to be a war and that I needed to prepare. And this was very early December 2019. And then, come January, February 2020, it was quite evident that I was going to need that stock of food
yeah.
and things that I had done. So I was very appreciative of that. And actually, interestingly, watching the TV updates that we got as lockdown progressed, they started to refer to it as a war, didn't they? A war against the virus. It was actually a terminology that they began to use. Because when it first happened, I thought, well, this isn't a war. What's she talking about? But and kept anticipating that there was going to be a war. But no, they started to use that terminology. So, and in a sense, it was a battle, wasn't it? A battle of you know, of your stoicism in a way, of
Mm,
getting through it mentally intact and keeping your family not just um, physically well, but mentally well as well.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
actually, lockdown, because we were fully prepared, ended up being some of the most wonderful times of our lives, bizarrely, in that we were, in the countryside, our village all pulled together. We had what we needed, and we just, it was a wonderful time of enjoying the silence and returning to nature, actually. And I think that if I hadn't have, been prepper level prepared because of meeting the Morrigan, that wouldn't have happened. There would have been a lot more worry. There would have been a lot more shop trips and exposure. So it kept us safe, and it turned what would have been a very traumatic time for us into a very joyous time, actually. Some great memories of being able to just romp about the countryside with the children. With no cars and just the silence and the birds. I mean, it was amazing. And I'm very mindful that people who lived in towns and cities had a very, very different experience. And we were very lucky that although we did get the virus and I was very ill and my son was very ill, we didn't lose anybody to the virus. So I'm very, aware that we had um, a very lucky and unique experience in that. But I think a, a part of that is the gift that Otherworld gave me of the forewarning and of the assistance and the protection. I'm no doubt that during that time I would have been protected. I was very gravely ill with the virus at one point.
Mm.
Um, and I think there definitely was a sense of that reassurance that I knew I had quite strong people that had my back, in Otherworld for sure.
Yeah, I mean, coming face to face with the Morrigan, um,
Yeah,
coming gravely ill afterwards,
yeah,
and there was a sense of, I remember there was everybody, growing in their gardens, and it had that kind of wartime feel. I
yes,
was in a member
yes.
of a group at that time where people were giving each other tips of, what we could grow in our gardens and things like that. Um, yeah, very interesting. And did you ever have a sense of her again, the Morrigan?
Yes. Yes. So that was basically her introduction to me in a way very much the same as Gwyn. It's, I'm going to introduce myself to you. I'm going to give you some really tangible things that prove I can be trusted and that I'm not misleading you. And then I'm going to start talking to you. So then um she would then come and speak to me as well. And she was a real part of my transformation as well. I remember she took me on a journey when I was, I used to just, after I'd been so ill, used to just lay in bed and do like yoga nidra to try and relax. And because I developed a really nasty post COVID like neurological condition called functional neurological disorder, and it was affecting my walking and my memory and my speaking, and it was really quite unpleasant and traumatic.
Mm.
And so I would just try and lay on my bed and do relaxation to try and, help. And during my sort of yoga nidra, you'd be in a sort of meditative state, and she
Mm.
would come and she would talk to me, and she took me on a journey where, she yeah, she doesn't mess about. She just took me high, high up in the air so I could see all the world and all the things. And then she dropped me. And I ended up face down in the dirt, literally face down in what felt like dusty dirt. And that was and she was like, this is the starting place.
Mm.
Face down in the dirt. It reminds me now because I've since I now read tarot and things, and it reminds me very much of the Ten of Swords in the Rider Waite, where that person's just face down on the ground,
Yeah.
all the swords are in the back, and it's like, right now you're going to get yourself up. And it was very much like humbling, like, okay, you think that, you know a few things, you know nothing, and you're going to start from the bottom like everybody else.
Yeah.
And yeah, absolutely no messing. And, I've since come to, really trust and appreciate her. But at the time, the ego fights it.
Mm,
doesn't it? You get that how very dare you sort of thing going on. But actually, again, that letting go of the ego
mm,
is part of the transformative process. And actually that full letting go of the ego and understanding that's what it was didn't come again for, that's happened in the last 5 years um, since this happened. And it has been a really, again, I think with also developing a condition where you pride yourself on being an active, strong, physically strong person, to lose all of that.
mm,
And I like to communicate. So to lose the ability to communicate, to lose the ability to walk, to have the energy. There was a point at which I was using a walker to walk. Um,
goodness me.
ex you know, properly
Mm,
humbled, you
yeah.
know,
Mm,
literally having your legs taken out from under you. Not only who do you think you are as an individual, but who you physically are, what you're capable of, returning you back to nothing to start again,
mm, mm,
like taking everything away was a really, um, you know, it's a process where you just start from scratch. And it was just, and I'm very lucky that I'm you know, largely back to normal now.
mm,
But it's taken 5 years and I am not the person I was physically or as a soul, you know. Like you say, I'm awake, I'm fully awake. The ego's been eviscerated, um, you know, through many, many lessons. And again, it's when you're going through it, it's not something that you would wish on your worst enemy. But when you've come through it, it's the greatest gift. My goodness me. I feel like I've been um, given my whole life back and my whole self back. Um, yeah, and but it's quite funny because the Morrigan doesn't mess about. There's no niceties, but it kind of like a strict mother, really. And but you love her anyway,
mm,
And she had a really interesting relationship with Gwyn as well,
mm,
um, because obviously they were both speaking to me at the same time, and he was very disapproving of her. He appreciated her role, but he didn't like her methods. And it was very funny. He didn't think that you should change things. He didn't think that you should meddle. He thought that what was what was given to you was made for you, and that you should, take the rough with the smooth, don't try and change things. This is your path, just go with it. And the Morrigan was very much like, oh no, yeah, we're just trying to sort this out. Let's do something about it. Let's change it. We don't want to do that. Let's change it. And Gwyn would be like, you can't do that. You mustn't do that. So she felt much more like a sorceress, in the sense that she was like, oh, this is going to happen, but
mm,
it's not going to be very nice. So should we just not do that? Yeah. And we should try and change it. So when that happens, you could just make a different decision and then it won't happen.
mm,
Um, and Gwyn would get quite upset about it. He would be like, no, 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 you mustn't change what's supposed to happen. You mustn't do that. And so I was sort of felt like a child caught between warring parents, you
yeah.
know. Yeah, I don't, what am I supposed to do? You're saying don't do this. You're saying, and yeah, I had to just kind of uh use my judgment. And there was a bit of experimentation with changing things. but it didn't always work out well.
Okay.
It was almost like meddling made it worse,
Mm.
in the sense that if you didn't learn the lesson in that way, it would come back tenfold.
Yeah.
And so I had to go through the process in order to understand that whilst I appreciated what the Morrigan was saying, I had to make my own call. And actually now, um, I don't meddle. Actually, I have a really strong, grounded um belief that kind of I keep having that saying from Julian of Norwich in my head where she says all shall be well and all shall be well and all manner of things shall be well. And whenever I'm worried about anything, I say that to myself because I think because during this process in the last 5 years when the Morrigan came, I also had a spontaneous Kundalini awakening happen, which I'm sure was part of the process. And having gone through that process, and I now I do the work. I practice Kundalini yoga, I practice Kriya yoga, um,
Oh,
and
right.
so as a part of that, because I don't think you can have that happen and not do the work.
Mm.
I think it can be quite dangerous actually if you have a Kundalini awakening and you don't go and do Kundalini yoga or Kriya yoga and do the work. I think it can come out in very destructive
Mm.
ways. The very primitive force, a very visceral force, and if you don't kind of manage that and process it, it can turn your life upside down, more so than mine has been. And and so I've learned through that process, through the Kundalini awakening process, that to just let go, to let go, to surrender, to not control. And that is the releasing of the ego, of not trying to control, just to completely say, okay, what are we doing today?
Mm.
I don't control anything, even things I really want to do, um, that I feel really invested in. I'm aware that things may happen that can completely derail that, and I must not meddle. I have to just go, okay, that's not meant for me at this time. And something else comes in its place
Yeah.
that is more important. And sometimes that can be very difficult. You know, if you really wanted to do that thing, or you know, it's not a pretty process. But I think if you have that level of trust that actually it's all happening and unfolding in the way it needs to, and that what's made for you is meant for you, then even things that happen that are not wonderful and magical, that are difficult, are much easier to process because you can almost immediately see the lesson in them. You can immediately see the value in them, um, and see even difficult things as an opportunity for growth and as a soul. And that's what this whole process has taught me, um, to let go and stop controlling anything at all, basically. Um, and, you know, the Morrigan is still around, but I think that Gwyn was right in that, you know, in that way that actually, who are we to change things? Who are we to change the way things are supposed to unfold? Because we're only seeing one part of it. And if we change one part, there's a knock-on effect that ends up messing up other things. And I appreciate that I can change things if I want to, but I no longer want to. And it's made me appreciate things like, you know, being able to nurse my dog through to end of life and things like that, as, you know, potentially terrible circumstances can end up being the most wonderful experiences of your life if you see the value and the opportunity in the lesson, and you appreciate the finiteness as well of the time you have with certain souls as well. I think if you were with people all the time, you'd get complacent, wouldn't you? But because your time with people is transient,
Mm.
um, you appreciate it more, even at the end.
Very wise words. I completely agree, and it is hard. It's really hard. And just kind of listening to you talk about the situation with this kind of, being thrown to the ground and sort of facing the dirt, and then needing to let go of ego and going through the hardest times when you're, loss of movement. And I'm also thinking that this is kind of what we're going through as a world at the moment as well, is that I feel like it's an ego death that's taking place. If we look at kind of, world leaders, there's some big ego death needs to kind of take place there. And then for us too, the kind of just letting go of the control and moving through to another way of being. And it may well be that our face is in the dirt and that we need to start from, from the beginning again, and that we have to admit that we really do know nothing. And I feel like this is all so relevant. What you were experiencing on kind of, micro level is also true for the macro. There's a lot to learn from all of this. I really appreciate you sharing this with all of us.
We're being shown who we really are. And I think my experience, that I went through was, like you say, just a micro version of what we're going through now on the macro level. And you can't go through that process without looking at your most awful parts of your nature. That's that shadow work. And now, I've been through that over the past 10 years with this whole experience. And now we're going through it as a world, certainly the Western world. There's
Yeah.
individuals going through it. There's whole cultures of people going through it. There's political groups going through it. We're going through it on a planetary level. And it's this a process of transmutation, isn't it? But you can't do that without looking at the most difficult parts of yourself.
Hi,
And
hi, folks. This episode is going to be in two parts because we had so much to speak about, and it really is an absolutely fascinating conversation.
Thanks so much for listening and watching. If you enjoyed the podcast, please consider joining us on Patreon for dozens more episodes of unreleased bonus content, monthly online events, and a private chat. We are a warm, supportive community, and it really helps to support the project. Find us on patreon.com/the Modern Fairy Sightings Podcast.